The twin sons of Valara Prime poured golden light into the royal throne room. Massive stone pillars stretched high above, carved with the history of the alien kingdom. Servants lined the walls, guards stood with sharp spears, and the air smelled, faintly, of burning incense. At the center, on a high seat of obsidian, sat King Velcor, tall, broad, his skin patterned in deep blue ridges, his eyes like polished steel. But today, the king's usual commanding presence was dimmed. His shoulders were heavy, and his gaze rested on the doors, as though waiting for someone important. That someone entered now. Captain Ethan Cole stepped inside, his human boots making a dull sound on the polished stone floor. He was dressed in simple military gear, not ceremonial armor, not anything flashy. He was not here to impress. He was here because the king had called for him. Ethan's brown hair was short and neat, his build lean but strong. His sharp green eyes scanned the massive hall before locking on the king. Ethan had fought for years in the joint defense force between humans and the Valaran people, earning a reputation for quick thinking and stubborn bravery. "Captain Cole?" King Velcor's deep voice filled the hall. "Come forward." Ethan walked across the long carpet, aware of the stares from alien nobles who whispered to each other. He had felt eyes like that before. Doubtful, suspicious, even hostile. Humans and Valarans were allies now, but trust did not always come easily. The captain bowed slightly, not as deep as the Valaran custom demanded, but enough to show respect. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady. The king studied him for a long moment. "You know the war is coming to our borders." "I've heard, sir," Ethan replied. "The Zathran Empire." The name itself was bitter. The Zathrans were a ruthless enemy, their armies crushing planets and enslaving those who resisted. Valara Prime had been preparing for months, but the enemy was stronger every day. "I have fought many wars," King Velcor said, "but this is the first where I fear I may lose more than my throne." His gaze shifted, and Ethan noticed movement to the side of the throne. From behind a tall curtain, a young woman stepped forward. She was small for a Valaran, her frame delicate, her long silver hair falling over her shoulders. Her skin was pale, almost too pale, and her steps were careful, like each one took more strength than she had. "This," the king said, "is my daughter, Princess Soraya." Ethan's eyes softened, but he stayed silent. "She was born frail," the king continued. "Her body does not have the strength of others her age. She tires easily. Her lungs are weak. The healers have kept her alive, but—" His voice tightened for a brief second. "If the war comes here, she will not survive the chaos." Ethan glanced at Soraya. She stood tall in posture, but her eyes, a brilliant violet, held caution. Not fear, exactly, but guarded distance. "I cannot keep her here," the king said, his voice hardening again. "And I will not let her be captured by the enemy. I need someone I can trust to take her far from the capital, train her to survive, and, perhaps, make her strong enough to defend herself." A small murmur ran through the nobles nearby. One of them, an older Valaran with gold armor, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, with respect, a human, our own warriors could—" The king silenced him with a raised hand. "Our warriors know the ways of Valara, but I need someone who thinks differently, someone who has endured hardship without the comfort of royal blood. Captain Cole has survived battles where others perished. He has led soldiers through impossible terrain, and most importantly, he understands that strength is not just in the body, it is in the will." Ethan felt the weight of the king's words. This wasn't just a guard mission. This was a responsibility to shape someone's future. "I accept," Ethan said simply. The king nodded once. "Good. You will leave at first light tomorrow. Supplies will be prepared. Choose your destination wisely. Somewhere far from the front lines, but harsh enough to teach her what she must learn. Ethan looked at Soraya. "Your Highness," he said, "this will not be easy." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I do not expect it to be." For a moment, Ethan thought he saw a flicker of challenge in her gaze, or perhaps annoyance. It was hard to tell. That night, Ethan stayed in the guest quarters of the palace. Through the wide window, he could see the glow of the city below. Tall towers, bright hovercraft lines in the air, marketplaces still busy despite the late hour. Somewhere out there, people were going about their lives, unaware that their world might soon fall under enemy attack. He sat at a small desk, going over a datapad filled with planetary maps. He needed a location that would test Soraya, but not kill her. Somewhere with enough resources to survive, but dangerous enough to force her to grow stronger. His mind settled on a desert world called Koresh 4. Its winds could strip the skin from the unprepared, and its nights froze the bones. But there were safe zones, hidden springs, and abandoned mining stations they could use for shelter. Ethan had trained soldiers there before. It would work. He heard a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he said. The door slid open, and Soraya stepped inside. She wore a light robe, her silver hair loosely tied back. Her violet eyes studied him carefully. "My father trusts you," she said, her voice calm but cool. "I do not know why." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You don't think I can protect you?" "I don't think anyone can," she replied, "not when the enemy comes. You don't understand what it means to be like me." Ethan crossed his arms. "Then explain it to me." She hesitated. "My body has failed me since I was born. The palace healers kept me alive, but they never let me train like the others. I cannot run as far. I cannot lift as much. I tire faster. In my people's eyes, I am weak, and weakness has no place in war." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "Do you want to stay that way?" Her jaw tightened. "Of course not, but wanting and becoming are not the same." "That's true," Ethan said, standing. "But the only way to become something else is to start. Tomorrow, we start." She didn't reply, but her eyes stayed locked on his. He could see the doubt there, and under it, something else. Something that looked a little like hope. At dawn, the royal courtyard was alive with movement. Servants loaded supplies into a small transport ship. Guards saluted Ethan as he checked the gear. Rations, water purifiers, portable shelters, training weapons. Soraya approached wearing travel armor, light, flexible, designed more for movement than heavy combat. It was clear she wasn't used to it. The straps sat awkwardly and she kept adjusting the belt. The king stood nearby, his expression stern, but his eyes softer when he looked at his daughter. "You will listen to Captain Cole," he said, "and you will return to me stronger than you left." "Yes, father," Soraya replied quietly. The king turned to Ethan. "If she dies, I will hold you responsible. If she returns unchanged, I will hold you more responsible." Ethan gave a short nod. "Understood." They boarded the transport. As the ship's engines roared to life, the city of Valara grew smaller beneath them. Soraya sat silently by the window, watching her home fade into the distance. Ethan sat across from her, already planning the first steps of her training. This was no ordinary mission. This was a promise to the king, to himself, and maybe, in time, to the girl sitting quietly across from him. By the time they reached Koresh 4, Princess Soraya would no longer be the frail girl everyone pitied, or they would both fail trying. The transport ship cut through the blackness of space, its engines humming steadily. Through the viewing glass, Koresh 4 came into sight, a swirling sphere of gold and rust, its surface marked by endless dunes and jagged mountain ridges. From a distance, it looked lifeless. From experience, Ethan knew it was far from empty. He glanced across the small cabin at Soraya. She sat with her back straight, her violet eyes fixed on the planet below. Her silver hair was tied neatly behind her head, but strands had slipped. Free during the long journey. She had hardly spoken since they left Valara Prime. "Ever been off-world?" Ethan asked. Her gaze didn't shift. "A few times, always to safe places. Gardens, palaces, worlds where the air smells sweet." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "Koresh 4 is not like that." Finally, she turned her eyes to him. "Why bring me here?" "Because this planet will teach you faster than I can," he replied. "You'll learn to survive here or it'll chew you up." For a moment, her expression hardened. "I'm not fragile glass, Captain." "No," Ethan said evenly. "But you've been kept like glass. We're going to change that." The ship touched down on a rocky plateau just before local sunset. The air outside shimmered with heat, and the horizon was painted with deep red light. Ethan opened the hatch, and a wave of dry, scorching wind slammed into them. Soraya instinctively covered her mouth and nose. "It's like breathing fire," she said, coughing slightly. "You'll get used to it," Ethan replied, stepping onto the cracked ground. "Or you won't. Either way, we're starting now." They unloaded the supplies. A few crates of food, water purifiers, a small collapsible shelter, and training gear. Ethan didn't bring luxury. He wanted Soraya to learn what she could live without. "First rule," he said, as she dragged one of the lighter crates toward their shelter site. "Never waste energy unless you have to." "I'm carrying this," she pointed out. "You're carrying it wrong," he corrected, walking over to adjust her grip. "Bend your knees, keep your back straight. You lose less energy that way." Her expression said she didn't appreciate the instruction, but she didn't argue. By the time they finished setting up the small shelter, night had fallen. The heat was gone, replaced by a sharp, bone-deep cold. Stars stretched endlessly overhead, brighter than anything seen from Valara Prime's busy skies. Ethan lit a small fire in a metal pit. Food first, then rest. Soraya sat across from him, watching as he cooked a simple stew from dried meat and dessert herbs. "I thought you'd have machines for this," she said. "I do," Ethan replied. "But the more you depend on machines, the worse you'll be when they break. Out here, you prepare for the moment when nothing works." She tasted the stew carefully. It was plain, but filling. She said nothing about the flavor, but she finished every bite. The next morning, Ethan woke her before sunrise. "It's freezing," she muttered, shivering as she stepped out of the shelter. "Move and you'll warm up," he said. He tossed her a small pack with water, a training blade, and a compact survival kit. "We're walking." They began trekking across the rocky plateau. The sun rose fast, turning the cold into biting heat within minutes. Ethan kept a steady pace, adjusting it slightly when Soraya started to lag. At first, she stayed quiet, but after an hour, her breathing was labored and sweat dripped down her face. "How much farther?" she asked. Ethan didn't slow. "We walk until I say stop. Out here, you don't get to choose when the ground ends." She clenched her teeth and pushed on. By midday, they reached the edge of a vast desert plain. Sand stretched endlessly and hot winds stung their faces. Ethan pointed to a distant ridge. "That's where we stop." Soraya stared. "That's hours away. Then we'd better keep moving." It took them the rest of the day to reach the ridge. By the time they climbed it, Soraya's legs trembled and every muscle in her body ached. "Set up camp," Ethan said. She dropped her pack and sat heavily on the ground. "I can't." Ethan looked down at her. "You think you can't," he said, "but you can. You just don't want to right now." She glared at him, but after a moment, she forced herself to stand and help him set the shelter. That night, they ate in silence. The days that followed were worse. Ethan made her walk through heat and cold, climb rocky cliffs, carry heavy packs, and practice with the training blade until her arms felt like lead. He drilled her on basic survival, finding water from the air using a condenser, reading the sun's position for direction, and spotting dangerous wildlife before it got too close. Soraya resisted at first, arguing when he pushed her too hard. But Ethan didn't raise his voice. He simply waited until she stopped talking and continued the exercise. On the 5th day, her legs gave out halfway through a steep climb. She sat on the ground, chest heaving, and said, "I'm not made for this. My body can't—" "Your body will follow your mind," Ethan cut in. "Right now, your mind is weak. That's what we're fixing." She looked at him with frustration, but deep down, something in his tone made her want to prove him wrong. One evening, as the twin moons rose, a sound echoed across the desert, low, rumbling, and getting closer. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Raiders. Soraya froze. "Raiders? Bandits who live out here," he said quickly, packing their gear. "They steal supplies, kill for sport. Stay behind me." Figures appeared in the distance, riding on hovering skiffs. They wore scavenged armor, and their weapons glinted in the moonlight. The first skiff charged toward them, and Ethan moved fast, firing warning shots into the sand. When the raiders didn't stop, he aimed higher, hitting the lead skiff's engine. It spun out of control, crashing into the dunes. The others circled, but Ethan's steady fire drove them back. In minutes, they were gone, disappearing into the night. Soraya stood rigid, clutching her training blade tightly. "Good," Ethan said calmly. "You stayed put, but next time you'll be ready to fight with me." Her voice was quiet. "I don't ever want to feel that helpless again." "Then tomorrow," he said, "we start real combat drills." The next morning, the training changed. Ethan showed her how to move her feet, how to keep her weight balanced, and how to read an opponent's shoulders to predict their strike. At first, her blows were clumsy, but after hours of repetition, they began to land with purpose. Days turned into weeks. Her endurance grew. She could run longer, climb higher, and swing her blade without losing her breath. She still wasn't as strong as a trained soldier, but she no longer collapsed after every challenge. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ethan handed her a small cup of water. "You've come farther than you think," he said. She looked into the flames. "Not far enough?" "That's good," he said with a faint smile. "It means you're still hungry for more." For the first time, Soraya allowed herself a small smile in return. The wind screamed over the desert plateau, pulling at the edges of the small camp. Ethan stood with his arms folded, watching Soraya move through her combat drills. Her training blade sliced through the air with more speed now, her stance steady, even when the wind tried to shove her off balance. It had been nearly 3 months since they landed on Koresh 4. The frail, pale princess, who had once gasped for breath after a short walk, was gone. In her place was someone leaner, sharper, and far more determined. But Ethan knew she was still untested. Training was one thing. Real danger was another. "Again," he called as she completed her last swing. Soraya tightened her grip and started the routine from the beginning. Footwork, strike, parry, step, strike. She kept her eyes locked forward, jaw tight, refusing to let the exhaustion show. By the time she finished, sweat was dripping from her temples. She lowered the blade, breathing heavily but not gasping for air. Ethan gave a small nod. "Better. Only better?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You're not a warrior until you've fought an enemy that's trying to kill you," Ethan said, "and lived to tell about it." Her eyes glinted. "Then when do I get that chance?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He was already thinking about a way to give her exactly that. 2 days later, they left camp at dawn, carrying only light, packs, and weapons. The sun was still low when they reached the edge of a canyon, its walls jagged and dark, the air inside cooler than the open desert. "This place is dangerous," Ethan said as they descended a narrow path. "Lots of things live here. Some won't bother you if you leave them alone. Others," he glanced at her, "won't give you the choice." Soraya gripped her blade. "Then I'll be ready." The canyon floor was scattered with rocks and strange plants with thick, spiny leaves. A slow drip of water echoed from somewhere ahead. They moved quietly, Ethan scanning the shadows. His years in combat had taught him that trouble often came when things seemed calm. And then it happened. From behind a boulder, a creature lunged. 4 legs, long fangs, and a hide patterned to blend with the rocks. It was as tall as Ethan's chest, moving fast. "Soraya!" Ethan shouted, stepping back. "It's yours!" Her heart hammered, but she stepped forward instead of retreating. The beast swiped with a claw, and she barely dodged, feeling the rush of air as it missed her by inches. Ethan didn't interfere. His hand stayed near his weapon, but his eyes watched her movements closely. The creature lunged again, and this time Soraya sidestepped, driving her blade toward its side. The blade hit, but only scraped its thick hide. The beast turned, snarling, and snapped its jaws at her. Fear flared in her chest, but so did something else. She remembered Ethan's words, "Read the shoulders. Watch where it's going before it moves." The creature tensed. Soraya dropped low, and when it leapt, she drove the blade upward into the softer flesh under its jaw. It collapsed with a heavy thud, breathing one last time before going still. Soraya stood over it, her breath quick, her hands trembling slightly, but she was still standing. Ethan walked up, looking at the beast, then at her. "First kill," he said. "How do you feel?" She looked down at the body. "Stronger," she admitted. Then after a pause, "and a little sad." "That's normal," Ethan said. "It means you're not a killer. You're a fighter. There's a difference." They skinned the creature for its hide, which would make strong armor plates, and took some meat for food. That night back at camp, Ethan roasted a piece over the fire. "You eat what you kill," he said, handing her a portion. She hesitated for only a moment before taking it. The meat was tough and gamey, but she chewed slowly, thoughtful. "Back in the palace," she said quietly, "they would never have... Let me do this. They'd say it's not proper for a princess." Ethan looked at her. "You're still a princess, but out here that title doesn't keep you alive. You've learned that now." She nodded slowly. "Yes, I have." In the following weeks, her training intensified. Ethan introduced her to heavier weapons, longer runs, and drills under extreme heat. He pushed her to fight while tired, while hungry, while her muscles screamed for rest. At first, she thought it was unfair. Then she realized it was exactly how real battle would be, when you never got to choose the conditions. She stopped complaining. One day, while sparring with Ethan, she managed to knock his blade out of his hand. He retrieved it with a grin. "Finally making me work for it." "I thought you were supposed to be the teacher," she said, smirking. "I am," he replied. "And a good teacher knows when the student's ready for the next step." The next step came sooner than she expected. Late one evening, as the twin moons rose, Ethan spotted movement on the horizon, lights bobbing in the dark. "Raiders," he said. "They're coming this way." "How many?" Soraya asked. "Too many for comfort," he replied. "But we can't run. They'll track us." Instead of fear, Soraya felt her pulse quicken with a strange excitement. This was the test she had been waiting for. They set up an ambush among the rocks near camp. Ethan handed her a compact blaster. "You remember what I taught you?" Hit hard, hit fast, and keep moving, she said. The first skiff roared into view, and Ethan fired, hitting its engine. Soraya followed his lead, targeting the raiders as they scrambled for cover. A tall, armored bandit charged her position. Instead of freezing, she stepped aside and slammed her training blade into the gap under his arm. He fell with a cry. By the time the fight ended, the surviving raiders were fleeing into the night, leaving their dead behind. Ethan walked over, looking her up and down. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "I couldn't," she replied simply. "Good," he said. "You're starting to think like a warrior." That night, as the fire crackled, Soraya stared at the flames. She thought about the girl who had left the palace months ago, pale, frail, and afraid of breaking. That girl was gone. She wasn't finished yet. She wasn't invincible. But she was no longer someone who needed to be protected at every step. And when the war reached Valara Prime, because she knew it would, she planned to stand in the front lines, not hide behind them. If you want, I can now move into Part 4. The warrior emerges in now at 1,500 words, where Soraya returns to her people as a fighter and takes command in her first real war mission. This is where her transformation shocks everyone back home. 2chatGPT said, "Here's Part 3 of the Alien King, entrusted his frail daughter to a human, who helped her become a powerful warrior. In 1,500 words, third person, simple English, and engaging. Style. Part 3. Breaking Limits." The wind howled over Koreshfor's desert cliffs as Soraya moved through her training routine. Her feet shifted firmly on the rocky ground, her body no longer trembling with weakness. The small silver blade in her hand sliced clean through the dry air as she practiced strikes and parries. Captain Ethan watched her closely. 3 months ago, this girl had struggled just to walk without fainting. Now she was steady, strong enough to train like a soldier. But Ethan knew strength was more than muscle. It was courage, focus, and the will to fight even when fear shouted to run. "Again!" Ethan called. Soraya tightened her grip and began. Her moves again: step, strike, parry, step, strike. Her violet eyes burned with determination. Sweat dripped from her brow, but she did not stop. "Better," Ethan said with a nod. "Only better?" she challenged. "You won't be a warrior until you've faced real danger," Ethan said. Soraya's eyes flickered with fire. "Then when do I get that danger?" Ethan's face grew serious. He had an idea. 2 days later, Ethan led Soraya to a deep canyon nearby. Its walls were sharp and dark, shadowed even in the bright day. Strange plants with thick thorns grew between cracks. The air was cooler here, but full of dangers unseen. "This canyon is home to creatures that won't welcome us," Ethan warned. "Some will attack if we get too close." Soraya held her, blade tight. "I'm ready." Suddenly, a creature burst from behind a boulder. It was large, 4-legged, sharp fangs shining, skin colored like the canyon rocks. It lunged at Soraya. "Your fight!" Ethan shouted, stepping back. Her heart pounded, but she stood her ground. The creature swiped, narrowly missing her. She remembered Ethan's lessons, watched the opponent's shoulders, predict its next move. When it lunged again, she dodged and stabbed her blade under its jaw. The beast let out a pained growl and collapsed. Soraya's hand shook, but she stood tall. Ethan approached. "First kill. How do you feel?" "Stronger," she said, "and a little sad." "That's normal," Ethan said. "You're a fighter, not a killer." They took the creature's hide to make armor and used some meat for food. That night by the fire, Soraya tasted the roasted meat. It was tough and different from palace food, but it filled her. "In the palace, they'd say this isn't proper for a princess," she said softly. Ethan looked at her. "Out here being, a princess won't keep you alive." She nodded, understanding more each day. Training grew harder. Ethan pushed her to run long distances, fight while tired, and think fast. Soraya learned to move with the desert wind, balance her weight, and use her agility. One day, while sparring, she knocked Ethan's blade away. He smiled. "You're catching up." "I thought I was still the student," she teased. "You are," Ethan said, "and good students get ready for the next challenge." That challenge came soon. One night, as two moons rose, Ethan saw moving lights in the distance. Raiders. Approaching. "Too many to fight in the open," he said, "but we can't run." Soraya's pulse raced, not with fear, but excitement. The news came like a thunderclap. King Veilcor had been captured. The war, which had been closing in slowly on Valara Prime, suddenly burst into chaos. Enemy forces, the ruthless Zathrons, stormed through the outskirts, tearing down villages and burning fields. The great alien capital, once thought safe behind walls and armies, was now in grave danger. Soraya and Ethan stood in a small command tent on the outskirts of the military camp. The air was thick with smoke and the tension of battle. Soldiers, some armored in heavy suits, others in lighter gear, moved quickly, preparing for the fight ahead. Soraya's heart beat hard. She no longer felt like the fragile princess who had left the palace months ago. Her hands gripped the training blade she had carried since Koresh 4, now worn but still sharp. "We have to save him," she said, voice steady but urgent. Ethan looked at her. "Are you sure you're ready?" She met his gaze. "I won't let my father die in a cage, not when I can fight." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then it's time to show them what you've learned." The first battle came quickly. Soraya found herself leading a small strike team into enemy territory. The soldiers, many skeptical at first of their young leader, now watched her closely. She was small, yes, but she moved with confidence and clarity, barking orders, reading the battlefield like a seasoned warrior. They navigated ruined streets and blasted out buildings, keeping low and using every shadow. Soraya's senses sharpened. The training on Koresh 4 had taught her to read danger before it came, to feel it in the air, to trust her instincts. When enemy patrols appeared, she led the team in swift attacks, quick strikes, careful retreats. Her blade flashed in the dim light, and her blaster fired with deadly precision. Her team began to trust her, inspired by her courage and calm. Word of the princess's skills spread quickly, from the whispered talks in the camps to the hurried reports. Sent back to the palace, soldiers began calling her the Desert Blade. Her armor, fashioned partly from the hide of the creature she had killed months before, gleamed under the harsh sun. Her silver hair was braided tightly to keep it from falling into her eyes during battle. The day came when they had to storm the enemy's fortress, the place where King Veilcor was held captive. The fortress was surrounded by high walls and guarded by heavily armed Zathran soldiers. The air buzzed with energy as Valaran and human forces prepared to fight their way inside. Soraya stood beside Ethan at the front line. She felt the weight of her armor and weapons, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like a part of her. The battle was fierce. Arrows and energy blasts streaked through the sky. Shouts and cries echoed over the clash of weapons and armor. Soraya charged forward with her strike team, cutting through enemy lines. Her movements were swift and precise, striking down foes with the blade and commanding her soldiers to flank and cover. In the chaos, she spotted the enemy commander, a tall Zathran with green scales and cruel eyes, their eyes locked, and Soraya felt a rush of adrenaline. The commander lunged at her, blade swinging fast. Soraya dodged, twisting and parrying with her training blade. The fight was brutal and close. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed. With a final burst of strength, Soraya found an opening. She drove her blade into the commander's side. He fell, defeated. The fortress gates fell soon after. King Veilcor was freed, weak but alive. His eyes shone with pride when he saw his daughter. You have become a true warrior, he said, voice thick with emotion. Soraya bowed slightly, feeling a swell of pride and relief. Ethan stood beside them, watching quietly. The king turned to Ethan. Thank you, Captain. You did not just protect my daughter, you made her strong. Ethan shrugged. She made herself strong. I only showed her the way. That night, as the camp settled, Soraya stood outside her tent, looking up at the stars. She thought about the long journey, from the fragile girl the king had feared to the warrior she had become. She knew the war was far from over, but she was ready. She was no longer the princess who needed protection. She was the desert blade. The dawn air was cold and sharp as Soraya stood beside Captain Ethan Cole. Before them stretched the enemy fortress, dark, heavy, and surrounded by thick walls bristling with weapons. Inside, her father, King Valcor, remained captive. The war had dragged on for months. Many lives were lost. Many battles fought. Yet here they were, on the edge of the final mission. Soraya's heart beat steadily. She wore armor made from the desert creature's hide, worn smooth by months of use. Her silver hair was braided tightly, and her violet eyes burned with determination. We have one chance, Ethan said softly. Get your father out, then get out fast. Soraya nodded, gripping her blade. Let's bring him home. They moved quietly through the shadows, using every trick Ethan had taught her. Their small team slipped past patrols, avoided traps, and climbed walls under the cover of darkness. The fortress was alive with guards and alarms, but Soraya's mind stayed clear. She was no longer the fragile girl who had doubted her strength. Every step forward was a step toward freedom, for her father, for her people. Deep inside, they found King Valcor's cell. The king looked weak, but his eyes brightened when Soraya stepped forward. My daughter, he whispered. Soraya smiled, brushing a stray silver hair from his face. I'm here now, father. We will leave together. Their escape was far from easy. Enemy soldiers rushed in, alerted by the guards outside. Ethan and Soraya fought side by side, their blades flashing and blasters firing. Soraya faced the enemy commander again, the one she had defeated months ago. This time, his anger was fiercer. They clashed fiercely. The commander was strong. But Soraya's skill had grown. With a final, precise strike, she defeated him once more. Outside the fortress, their team fought through waves of enemy reinforcements. The air was thick with smoke and the cries of battle. But Soraya's voice rang clear as she led her people forward. Hold the line! Protect the king! Her soldiers responded with renewed strength, pushing back the enemy. When at last the gates opened and freedom was theirs, King Valcor turned to Ethan and Soraya. You have both saved me and saved our kingdom, he said. His voice was proud and steady. Soraya, you have become a warrior worthy of my crown. Soraya bowed deeply. I will protect our people, father, as you taught me. Ethan smiled, watching them. She no longer needs me. That night, as the stars shone bright, Soraya stood outside the palace. Her armor was gone, replaced by a simple cloak. But her posture was strong and sure. She looked up at the sky, thinking about the journey, from the frail princess who had feared for her life to the warrior who had saved a king. The kingdom was safe, and Soraya was ready to lead.